In 1911, two men were mining bat guano out of a cave in the Nevada desert and selling it as fertilizer. 6 feet down, they stopped hitting guano and started hitting artifacts. They shipped more than 250 tons of material to a company in San Francisco before anyone with a trowel arrived. That cave is in Nevada, and it is nowhere near the strangest thing we found there. That place makes this list. So do 11 others. A village of stone houses at 11,000 feet, built on a summit where trees will not grow. A 1,000-year-old city that archaeologists dug until the rising water of Lake Mead reached their trenches. Mile-long bulldozer cuts carved into the desert in 1962, still visible from the tract housing that backs onto them now. Stick with us to the end, because number 1 is a man buried in moccasins and a rabbit skin blanket, found in 1940, then filed in a museum storeroom for 54 years. This channel goes looking for the places history left off the map. Subscribe if that is your kind of detour. Today we are counting down 12 ancient sites in Nevada that scientists are still arguing about. Number 12, Grimes Point and Hidden Cave, the 4,000-year-old storage unit. Start 7 miles east of Fallon, on the stretch of Highway 50 that the road signs call the loneliest road in America. There is a field of black basalt boulders sitting on bleached ground, coated in the glossy patina the desert grows back over stone. People were carving into those boulders perhaps 8,000 years ago. The site went on the National Register in 1972. A mile and a half further, up a slope, is an opening you could drive past 100 times without seeing. Waves from Pleistocene Lake Lahontan cut it roughly 21,000 years ago. 4 schoolboys found it in the mid-1920s. Nobody ever lived in Hidden Cave. Too dark, too dusty, too cramped. What people did instead, between 3,500 and 3,800 years ago, was dig pits into the floor, line them, fill them, and cover them over. Here is what gives it away. At a place people lived, archaeologists find broken things somebody threw out. At Hidden Cave, they found whole things, stacked in deliberate concentrations. That is not garbage, that is inventory. You can still go in, on guided tours, the 2nd and 4th Saturday of every month. The pits are empty now. Somebody made a plan to come back, and the plan outlasted them by 4,000 years. Number 11, Gypsum Cave, the cave that fooled everyone. Roughly 12 miles east of Las Vegas, in the gray limestone of Sunrise Mountain, there is a low opening into a cave about 300 feet long and 120 feet wide. In January 1930, an archaeologist named Mark Harrington arrived to dig it, in a snowstorm heavy enough to delay setting up camp by a week. Locals had told him the cave was full of dried seaweed left by an evaporated pool. Harrington knew immediately it was dung. The question was what animal produced that much of it. The answer was the Shasta ground sloth. His crew pulled out the backbone, the reddish-brown hair, claws between 9 and 12 inches long, and bones of extinct horse and camel. The skull came out of room 3, found by Bertha Parker Palin, Harrington's niece, hired as the expedition secretary, with no formal training, and now recognized as one of the first Native American women to work in archaeology. Mixed in with the dung were painted dart shafts, torches, stone points, and yucca string. Harrington announced he had proof that humans and Ice Age giants shared the cave. His peers doubted it immediately. Radiocarbon settled it decades later. The dung dated to between 8,500 and 10,500 years old. The darts came in between roughly 3,300 and 4,250 years old. He was off by 6,000 years. The Nevada historical marker for the site has since been removed, and the bones live in Los Angeles now. The best find in that cave is one nobody argued about, a fragment of basket, 9,280 years old, woven in a pattern that matches nothing else known. Number 10, the Mount Irish Archaeological District, the figure that exists nowhere else on Earth. There is a humanoid carved into the volcanic rock of one Nevada valley, rectangular or oval body, spindly legs, arms ending in long fingers, blank spaces where eyes should be. Archaeologists call it the Paranagat style. Everyone else calls it Paranagat Man. It appears at Mount Irish, in Lincoln County, inside Basin and Range National Monument, and across a handful of nearby sites in the same valley system. And then it stops. Not anywhere else in Nevada. Not anywhere else in the American West. That is the strange part, because rock art usually travels. Bighorn sheep get pecked into stone from Nevada to New Mexico because motifs move with people and trade and stories. This one did not move at all. Mount Irish holds one of the largest petroglyph concentrations in the state. Shaman Hill alone carries 129 panels. You can read the sequence of use in the darkness of the carvings, because each one has been slowly revarnished by the desert, and the newer additions are paler than the old. Some of the figures hold atlackles, spear throwers replaced by the bow here more than 1,500 years ago, which gives a rough floor for their age. Many have smaller attendant figures placed near their heads or feet. Documented use of the area continues into the 1860s. The site is open. There is an interpretive trail, numbered markers, and a registration box, and you will want a high-clearance vehicle to reach it. A Las Vegas television crew once built an investigative segment around these figures because they look so uncannily like something not human, and it is probably a coincidence that they exist only in the same county that gave the world Area 51. Probably. Number 9. The Tosawihi Quarries. The White Knives. In Elko County, in the rolling sagebrush uplands of north-central Nevada, the ground is scattered with stone, the color of fresh snow. Western Shoshone people have come here for more than 10,000 years to gather that white chert. They hunted here, gathered medicine plants, and buried their dead here. The word Tosawihi means white knives, an ancestral tribal name that ties the people directly to the stone. The stone, the water, and the whole place are considered sacred, and the boundaries drawn by archaeologists and federal agencies do not match where the tribe understands the site to begin and end. Tools made from this chert have turned up as far north as Canada and as far south as New Mexico. It reached Central Oregon, roughly 300 kilometers away. It is reportedly identifiable under a black light. Unlike other white cherts, it fluoresces, which is how a flake found a continent away can be traced back to this hillside. Then, about 1,500 years ago, the quarrying intensified sharply, and the stone started traveling much further than before. Researchers have published the obvious question: was it trade? If so, what was coming back, and from whom? Nobody has answered it. The complication is what sits underneath. Gold lies in veins beneath the chert, on land managed by the Bureau of Land Management, under a federal mining law written in 1872 that treats mineral extraction as a favored use of public land. In 2013, a Nevada-based company, owned by a Cayman Islands firm, bought out a bankrupt gold operation working the quarries. In December 2015, 3 bone fragments were unearthed during that work. The contract archaeologist wrote that there was not enough material present to identify the species. The Tamok Western Shoshone have been fighting for this ground across generations. This is not a place you visit. It is a place people are still trying to keep. Number 8. Gatecliff Rock Shelter, 40 feet of time. The reason this site exists is a flaw in the drainage above it. A canyon in the Toquima Range floods repeatedly, and every flood dumps a layer of silt across the shelter floor below. The silt dries. People come back, camp, hunt bighorn, leave their tools. The next flood buries all of it. Do that for thousands of years, and you get one of the cleanest stratigraphic sequences in the hemisphere. Every occupation sealed off from the one before it, like pages turning. David Hurst Thomas found it in June 1970, after a geologist named Gale Peer mentioned an interesting cave to him. Thomas then searched roughly 15 canyons to locate it, at 7,750 feet in Mill Canyon. What he dug into was over 12 meters of deposits, packed into a floor area of about 300 square feet, smaller than a 2-car garage, nearly 40 feet deep in places. It has been called the deepest archaeological rock shelter in the Americas. Excavation ran close to 7 years, until the vertical walls became genuinely dangerous, and Thomas had to abandon digging down and start digging wide instead. Out of it came more than 51,000 animal bones, overwhelmingly bighorn sheep, over 400 projectile points, baskets and cordage that should not have survived at all, and flat slate shards covered in incised geometric designs in a quantity described as unmatched anywhere in the New World. Nobody knows what they were for. The shelter is on the National Register. The trench is backfilled. The collections are in New York, and there is no sign, no trail, and no reason for anyone to stop. Somebody sat in that shelter, scratching patterns into slate, and the only honest thing archaeology can say about it is that they did it a lot. Number 7. Tule Springs Fossil Beds. The dig that proved everyone wrong. In October 1962, heavy construction equipment rolled into the desert north of Las Vegas and started cutting the landscape open. This was not delicate work. Over 4 months, crews moved roughly 200,000 tons of dirt. They carved trenches up to a mile long, with vertical walls as deep as 13 meters, nearly 43 feet. It was the first time heavy equipment had been used at that scale on an archaeological project. They were there to answer Harrington's question. His claim at Gypsum Cave, that Ice Age animals and humans had overlapped in Nevada, had never properly died, and a generation of researchers wanted cleaner evidence. Tule Springs was the biggest swing anyone took at it. Bones had been reported in this wash as far back as 1903, and quarry workers uncovered a Columbian mammoth here in 1933. The trenches worked exactly as designed. 40-foot walls of Ice Age sediment, readable straight off the face. Columbian mammoth, dire wolf, camelops, saber-toothed cat, ground sloth, horse, bison, all of it there. No humans, none. Vance Haynes, the geologist who mapped those trench walls, has said publicly that he arrived expecting to be part of a major discovery, and instead helped disprove the idea. The mammoths lived and died here. People arrived afterwards. Today the site is a 22,650-acre national monument, the only one in the country dedicated solely to Ice Age fossils, open daily during daylight hours. Bones are still eroding out of the ground. Visitors are asked to photograph them and leave them alone. And the trenches are still there. Suburban North Las Vegas now runs right up to the lip of a landscape scarred by mile-long bulldozer cuts, dug at enormous expense to find a man who was never in it. We opened this video with a cave full of bat guano, and that one is still coming. Number 3. And it gets stranger. If you are enjoying the deep dive, drop a thumbs up and tell us in the comments which of these you had never heard of before today. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. Number 6. Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park. The 217-million-year-old crime scene. 3 hours from Reno, in a dry canyon in the Shoshone Mountains, there is a building with no walls to speak of, built directly over a slab of exposed bedrock. You walk in, and you are standing above the skeletons of giant marine reptiles, still lying in the rock, exactly where they came to rest. Shonosaurus popularis reached about 50 feet long. Roughly 40 of them are here, in one geological layer, in what was once an arm of the ocean covering this part of Nevada. The bone bed was found in 1928. Berkeley paleontologists Charles Camp and Samuel Wells excavated through the 1950s and 60s. And for more than half a century afterwards, nobody could explain the arrangement, because that is not how animals die. 40 enormous marine reptiles of one species, concentrated in a single layer, with clams and ammonites around them, and almost nothing else large at all. The theories piled up: a mass stranding, like a modern whale beaching; a toxic algal bloom; a shift in water chemistry; volcanic disturbance; and, published seriously, the suggestion that an enormous unknown squid killed them and arranged their vertebrae in its lair. In 2022, a team from Vanderbilt, the Natural History Museum of Utah, and the Smithsonian worked it like a forensic case. They tested the rock for mercury and found no volcanic signature. They tested carbon and found no oxygen collapse from algae. The geology showed the bones sank to the seafloor rather than piling on a shoreline, which killed the stranding idea. Then micro-CT scans of tiny bones from the site identified embryos and newborns, adults and infants, and no juveniles in between. That is the signature of a birthing ground, the same pattern whales leave today. The park is open, with camping, and the ghost mining town of Berlin sits 2 miles away in arrested decay. 40 sea monsters, and the answer was that they came here to have their young. Number 5. Alta Toquima Village, the village in the sky. For most of the 20th century, the model was simple. The high country was a larder, not a home. You climbed up in summer, ambushed bighorn sheep from stacked stone blinds, carried the meat back down, and left before the weather turned. Then David Hurst Thomas recorded a site on the south summit of Mount Jefferson, at almost exactly 11,000 feet, 3,352 meters, on the third highest point in Nevada. At least 31 residential stone structures, strung along an east-facing slope steep enough to make standing awkward. Not hunting blinds. Houses, with the ordinary debris of domestic life around them. When it was first recorded in 1978, it was the highest American Indian village site known in the Northern Hemisphere. The sequence Thomas built runs like this. From roughly 2500 BC to the start of the first millennium, small hunting parties used the mountains intermittently. Then, after about AD 1, something changed, and people began building villages up here, occupied for months at a time, by families, sustaining themselves on elk, sheep, marmot, fish, eagles, berries, pine nuts, and roots. Above the tree line, on a summit where the growing season is measured in weeks and the weather can turn lethal in an afternoon, women and children spent entire summers there. Why is still argued. Population pressure in the valleys below, climate shifts pushing bighorn ranges upslope, changes in how groups organize their labor. All plausible, none settled. The genuinely strange part is the negative result. More than 150 radiocarbon dates from here and from Gatecliff let researchers compare 7,000 years of change in fine detail. Similar alpine villages exist in California's White Mountains. And despite decades of looking, nowhere else in the Intermountain West. If this were simply a good idea, it should have happened everywhere. It didn't. The house rings and the honeycombed hunting blinds are still up there, inside designated wilderness. No road, no trail, no signage. You reach it on foot or by mule, up a long rocky climb. The report ran to more than 900 pages and came out decades after the digging stopped. The wind has been blowing across those stones the entire time. Number 4. Pueblo Grande de Nevada, the Lost City. The excavation did not end with a conclusion. It ended with a waterline. In the Moapa Valley, an hour north of Las Vegas, people built and occupied a settlement complex from roughly AD 300 to AD 1150. Several hundred pit houses, campsites, rock shelters, salt mines, and caves. Housing structures of 20 rooms or more, and one building with more than 100. They grew corn, beans, squash, and cotton on irrigated fields. They wove fine cotton cloth. They mined salt and turquoise and traded it to coastal peoples for seashells. The architecture and pottery connect back to the Chaco culture in what is now New Mexico, which makes this the westernmost reach of ancestral Puebloan culture we know of. In 1924, 2 brothers from Overton, John and Fay Perkins, found artifacts in the valley and told the governor, James Scrugham. Scrugham brought in Mark Raymond Harrington, the same Harrington from Gypsum Cave, to dig. 4 years later, Coolidge signed the bill authorizing Hoover Dam. So everybody involved knew. They knew what was coming, and roughly when, and they dug anyway. The National Park Service took over funding in 1934. Harrington used Depression-era Civilian Conservation Corps labor, Companies 974 and 573, and was joined by Zuni workers helping catalog the ancestors of related peoples. He documented 45 homesteads and at least 45 burials, most laid with pottery, some with baskets, cotton wrappings, turquoise and shell beads. Crews worked until the rising water of Lake Mead physically reached the trenches and stopped them. Then the most developed part of the city was gone. So was the town of St. Thomas. The Lost City Museum opened in Overton in 1935 to hold what they managed to save, and it is still open, with reconstructed Pueblo architecture out front. And underneath the drowning there is a second, older question nobody has answered. These people left around AD 1150, part of a wider withdrawal from the region, and the reasons are still debated. You can drive out to the Overton Arm on good paved road and look at the water. That is the whole visit. The drama is entirely in what is not there. Number 3. Lovelock Cave. The cave that ate its own evidence. Back to the Guano. The cave sits in the Humboldt Sink, a flat salt-crusted basin that used to be under Lake Lahontan, about 15 to 20 miles south of the town of Lovelock. It is roughly 150 feet long and 35 feet wide, cut into limestone. A mining engineer named John T. Reed was taken there by Paiute people in 1886 and told a story about the place. When he went in, all he found was bat guano. In 1911, David Pugh and James Hart started mining that guano commercially and shipped more than 250 tons to a San Francisco fertilizer company. Whatever artifacts came up in the process were mostly lost or thrown out. Llewellyn Loud of the University of California arrived in spring 1912 and recovered around 10,000 specimens. His report described them in a single paragraph. That is the first disaster. The stratigraphy was destroyed before anyone competent got there. The second disaster was narrative. There is a genuine Northern Paiute oral tradition about enemies called the Site Ka, written down in 1882 by Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, who described them as barbarians and did not describe giants. Early 20th century newspapers ran sensational reports of oversized red-haired mummies. The two things fused, and the result is a legend about red-haired cannibal giants that has outlived every correction anyone has published. There is no peer-reviewed evidence for any of it. The remains actually excavated were not giant-sized, which is a shame, because the real find is better. Loud came back with Harrington in 1924, and between them, they excavated around 40 storage pits, 2 to 4 feet deep, grass-lined and rock-covered. The tops sat at different heights, which let archaeologists sort them by generation. Out of one of those pits came 11 duck decoys, bundled marsh Tule, painted, with real duck feathers still attached, made somewhere between 400 BC and AD 100. They are the oldest decoys known anywhere on Earth, and in 1995, Nevada made one of them the official state artifact. The cave is open, at the end of a 20-mile backcountry byway, and it is completely empty. Every object is in a museum or has gone home to the tribes. People invented giants for a place that had already given them something better. Number 2. The Winnemucca Lake Petroglyphs. Older than the pyramids by 8,000 years. The lake has been dry since the 1930s, when a dam and a road cut off its inflow. What is left is a pale, cracked basin, studded with tufa, knobbled towers of calcium carbonate, left behind by water that is no longer there. On limestone boulders at the western edge are deep, heavy carvings, grooves and dots forming vertical chain-like patterns, ovals and diamonds linked in sequence, and branching forms that look something like trees. One of them stands 70 centimeters tall. No people, no animals, no handprints, nothing recognizable at all. In 2013, Larry Benson of the University of Colorado Boulder published a study in the Journal of Archaeological Science, dating them to at least 10,500 years old, and possibly as much as 14,800. Either number makes them the oldest dated petroglyphs in North America. Here is the wild part. Nobody was allowed to touch them. Direct dating would have meant scraping inside the grooves, and the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe refused permission. Benson was restricted to non-invasive work, at the side of the carvings only, so the team dated the lake instead. They worked out the elevation at which the ancient system spilled over Emerson Pass and established when the water had dropped far enough to leave the boulders in open air. Below the waterline, no carving is possible. Above it, it is. Radiocarbon on the carbonate crust beneath the grooves gave one bracket. Carbonate laid over the top of the grooves gave the other. That produced two windows when the rock was exposed and carvable, between 14,800 and 13,200 years ago, and again between about 11,300 and 10,500. One of those windows is inside the Ice Age. What the carvings mean is entirely unknown. They were made by people standing on a shoreline that was in the process of disappearing. You cannot go. The site sits within the Pyramid Lake Indian Reservation, and cultural sites there have been closed to outsiders after repeated vandalism, including damage inflicted with power tools, documented by the Nevada State Museum's curator of anthropology. There is a no trespassing sign at the turnoff, the oldest art on the continent, and the only correct response left is to stay off it. Number 1. Spirit Cave. Wind, and then nothing. The foothills of the Stillwater Mountains sit low and sun-bleached above the flat Carson Desert, sparse sage, ground cracked into plates. 4,154 feet up, there is a small dry alcove in the rock. No marker, no trail, no sign anywhere on the highway below, telling you it exists. That dryness is the entire reason any of this happened. It is the specific hush of a place people have decided not to disturb. In August 1940, a husband and wife archaeological team, Sidney and Georgia Wheeler, were working about 13 miles east of Fallon when they found a burial in that alcove. A man, partially mummified, wearing moccasins, wrapped in a rabbit skin blanket, and woven reed mats. He had been in his 40s when he died. With local help, the Wheelers recovered 67 artifacts in total. They had no idea what they had. He was estimated at 1,500 to 2,000 years old. The following summer, he was displayed at the Nevada State Fair. Then he was handed to the Nevada State Museum, cataloged, and put into storage in Carson City. He stayed there for 54 years. In 1997, radiocarbon dating finally reached him. He was about 10,700 years old, not 2,000. The oldest naturally created mummy known in North America, and the number rewrote the timeline of who had been living in this basin, which started the fight. The Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe sought his return under federal repatriation law. The Bureau of Land Management refused. The tribe sued. That case ran for roughly 2 decades, because a body that old was exactly what science most wanted to study and exactly what the tribe most wanted back. The resolution came from the technology at the center of the argument. In October 2015, after meeting with tribal members, the geneticist S.K. Willerslev came to Nevada and took bone and tooth samples. The sequencing showed the remains were more closely related to indigenous peoples of North and South America than to any other population on Earth. An unbroken line, running from this man to the people still living here. On the 22nd of November 2016, he was repatriated. The Interior Department announced the transfer the following day, with the BLM director citing extensive consultation with the tribe. Not everyone agreed. The anthropologist Richard Jantz, who had studied the remains, publicly called it a sad day. In 2018, the tribe reburied him in a private ceremony. There is nothing to visit. The exact location is protected under federal law, deliberately unmapped, off the same stretch of Highway 50 you drove for number 12, with no trail and no invitation. The oldest mummy on Earth spent 54 years on a shelf in Carson City, misfiled by roughly 9,000 years. When science finally worked out what it was holding, the answer was to give him back. He is out there somewhere in the sage, and this time nobody is writing down where. There are more of these than would fit. A canyon near Laughlin the Yuman peoples describe as the place creation began, and a rock shelter whose Ice Age claim was quietly overturned only a few years ago. My own favorite is Alta Toquima, because 31 stone houses above the tree line is the kind of fact that refuses to make sense. Which one surprised you, and which Nevada site did we miss? Subscribe, and we will keep going.